Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, U.S. forces engage in the biggest training exercise of 2021, which includes a historic jump for the Army's 82nd Airborne. And the cost of shipping pets during a PCS can be in the thousands. A new program aims to offer service members a break. Plus, new guidelines for training with weapons at a base where a soldier used his M4 to hijack a bus. We also take a look into multi-domain operations and hear how the Biden administration wants to improve response time to cyber attacks on the government. It's all the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Stay with us. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. There's a lot of news to cover, so let's jump right to it. We begin in Europe, where U.S. forces are engaged in one of the biggest joint exercises of the year, Defender Europe. On the agenda for the Army-led series of exercises with partner militaries is everything from massive parachute missions to tank live fires. Jesse Karangu and Todd South have more.
One of the biggest annual military exercises between the U.S. and its allied partners is back in swing a year after the coronavirus epidemic. Defender Europe 2021 is a joint exercise that involves 28,000 troops from 27 nations in more than 30 training areas. All of this is happening on the heels of tension between Russia and NATO allied partners due to the actions of Russia in the Ukraine. Military Times' Todd South joins us to discuss what's happening in this European exercise. Todd, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
So first of all, what was the significance of this year's exercise?
Well, each year for the last few years, they've done a Defender Europe. It's essentially bringing together U.S. and NATO forces across the continent and even into northern Africa, really to deter any kind of aggressor adversary. Essentially, that's going to be Russia. So it's the largest exercise of the year. Last year was curtailed quite a bit due to COVID, so this year they're really having a chance to get back into it the way they had always planned and the way they've been typically doing it and continue to grow the exercise.
So Russia has increased troop movement in Ukraine. How much has that influenced this year's exercise?
Well, officially, there's really not a lot of comment on that. Now, Russia does do a lot of exercises near the borders. They've done exercises up near the Baltics and down by Ukraine in the past. They have their own annual exercise. They call them Zapods. This one actually was a little bit closer to the border than normal and a higher concentration of troops. They had up to about 100,000 soldiers there at one point a few weeks ago, which they drew down to about 80,000, but kept them and their equipment there even as this exercise kicked off on the other side with NATO and the U.S.
Has the exercise changed Russia's behavior at all?
We're not seeing a lot of that right now. It's more of a watch and see, more of an observation. It seems like when Russia has their exercises, the NATO and the U.S. watch closely, and when the U.S. and NATO have their exercises, Russia kind of watches closely. So there's a little bit of looking back and forth across the borders, kind of watching what's going on, watching what's being exercised, and taking notes, essentially.
And how many different activities are involved with this military exercise?
Well, so there's 26 countries, about 28,000 soldiers across those countries. It ranges everywhere from the north is to the Baltics, say Estonia, even countries such as Norway and Finland are involved, all the way sweeping down into Morocco and northern Africa. As far as number of activities, I mean, there's dozens. There's airborne operations that kicked off the first week of May, large scale, 3 brigade airborne drops. One involved the 82nd Airborne from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, flying all the way with a refueling midair from North Carolina to Estonia to then do a drop, which is kind of out of the ordinary. Normally they do that from Europe in a much shorter distance. Since then, they've also done a lot of fires exercises, including missile shoots, live fire ranges, infantry and armor type work with local countries that are hosting different allies and partners.
So why is the U.S. and NATO so adamant about doing this? And what's the big picture here?
So a long time ago, during the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was around, this was a pretty standard operation, pretty standard exercise, actually even much larger in some capacities. And it was always really to counter any potential encroachment or even invasion by Russia on the eastern flank of Europe. That kind of fell by the wayside, of course, in the 90s and in post 9/11, when we were very caught up with things in the Middle East and other parts of the world. They're really kind of trying to build that back up, because in the last 10 years or so, Russia's really advanced their weapons systems. They've done things like annex territory such as Crimea near Ukraine, as part of Ukraine, and they've kind of been doing a little bit of aggravation, kind of friction on the borders of other countries, which puts our allies at risk and puts them in a kind of a nervous position. So this is really a chance to show what equipment and capabilities we have, how quickly we can move and maneuver forces across the whole continent if we need to, and it helps our allies really see kind of how their capabilities fit within ours and what they could do to help defend themselves. So it's kind of a reemergence of some historical factors, but also some new modern updated techniques, modern updated equipment, different ways of doing countering aggression, and just a way to exercise that and practice it so that if it ever does happen, it's not the first time those soldiers are hitting the battlefield together.
So we're hearing a lot about Russia in the news and the headlines. Is there any effort by the U.S. and other allies to combat China as well?
Actually, yes. In the last couple of years, they've actually started an exercise quite similar called Pacific Defender. And of course, it's bringing together partners and allies. We don't have a NATO in Asia, but they're kind of trying to build a version of that with Pacific partners. Of course, also India is now included in that. So Pacific Defender is started small and it's growing. There's getting more nation involvement, more locations, and more troops and equipment. Not quite to the scale of Defender Europe yet. Pacific Defender is growing in the same capacity and doing some of the same work, of course, to counter China.
Last year's proceedings were supposed to be the largest NATO exercise in Europe in 25 years. COVID-19 unfortunately changed those plans. The epidemic is still going on, but officials in the United States and NATO say that it was important and vital to continue these exercises to, quote, defend the peace. For Defense News Weekly, I'm Jesse Karangu.
Thanks, guys. In other headlines this week, the base where an Army trainee ran out and hijacked a school bus full of kids with an unloaded M4 has put a pause on training with weapons. On May 6th, Army trainee Jovan Collazo escaped from Fort Jackson, South Carolina with his weapon, eventually taking over the school bus for more than 6 minutes before ordering everyone off and driving away. Army officials said the pause on training with weapons means all weapons in basic training will be kept in an arms room until needed for specific events. And part of moving your home during a PCS is getting your pets to your new destination, a costly necessity for some military families. For those who have to hire outside services, a new option is available for sailors and Marines through the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society. The Society recently launched an interest-free loan program for up to $5,500 to cover the cost of moving 2 pets. The Air Force Aid Society is also working on a similar program for Airmen and Space Force Guardians. Check out militarytimes.com for more. And finally, author Sebastian Junger is the man behind recent works on modern warfare, the documentary Restrepo, and his book titled War. Recently, he spoke to Military Times' Sarah Sicard about his forthcoming book about the concept of freedom.
After years of documenting the complex relationship between freedom and community in the war in Afghanistan, renowned author Sebastian Junger decided to embark on a 400-mile domestic pilgrimage along the wilds of rural American railroads, exploring the human spirit in its pursuit of freedom while attempting to avoid political rhetoric so often associated with the word. In his newest book, Freedom, Junger contemplates the intersection of autonomy and coterie at a time when the word itself, while holding so much meaning, is so often misunderstood. In an interview with Military Times, he talks about his latest work.
I studied anthropology in college, and I tend to see my subjects through that lens. And so my work on soldiers, has sort of considered the platoon to be an example of a sort of primordial human group of about 30, 40 people. That's exactly the kind of group humans evolved in. So I saw the dynamics between the individuals. Of course, it was all men. It wasn't 50-50. But I saw the dynamics between the individuals as representing something of a kind of basic ancient human interaction. And of course, the search for autonomy, for freedom from a dominating, controlling greater power is ancient as well. It's adaptive to want freedom, and it's ancient like wanting to belong to a group is ancient. In fact, they go together. There basically is no freedom without making an allegiance to a group that can protect you. And once you do that, you owe your service to that group, which is also a deprivation of one's freedom. So it's like, I think anyone in the military would understand that, like, okay, you have to abide by the norms of the platoon, but the platoon will keep you safe from being killed by the Taliban. And that's the ancient human trade-off. So, would a service member see that connection? I hope so. I wrote the book with that in mind.
Younger shared why he thinks his book will resonate with service members in particular.
I wanted to at least write a book that gave everybody a sort of clear context for the word freedom and a good shot at understanding the word outside of this sort of sometimes silly conversation about freedom that we are witnessing right now.
This is what he hopes readers will ultimately glean from Freedom, which went on sale May 18th.
I mean, my goal was to explain how freedom works on a very social and biological level, and to avoid the often partisan rhetoric around the word freedom and the misuse of the word, sort of dragooned into service for almost any political end. And I think that's it's just like, I mean, I kind of roll my eyes every time I hear someone say that they're doing something for freedom. Like it almost invariably they're actually talking about either justice or their rights, or that they just want to be completely unaccountable to anybody, which is a pretty juvenile desire.
Thanks, Sarah. And that's it from our military headlines this week. When we come back, a look into multi-domain operations and the new administration's approach to cyber attack response. Stay tuned.
The military and defense market is constantly evolving. Stay on top of the latest news with Sightline Media Group's live events. Continue to learn, understand new tools and technologies.
We're live. You're on in 3.
Defense, government, and industry leaders come together for successful and proven engaging events. You'll gain valuable insight, get the chance to ask questions, all from the comfort of your own home or office. Sign up for our events newsletters and receive alerts for upcoming live streams.
We often hear about joint domain operations and multi-domain operations. In Defense News' new Pathfinder series, we dig into what that means.
To you, what is multi-domain operations or joint all-domain operations? This phrase we hear about, and what does it mean to you? And then maybe we can go a little bit deeper into that.
There might be confusion about joint all-domain operations versus multi-domain operations, but in my mind, they're very much working toward the same goal. Starting with JADO, or Joint All-Domain Operations, it's really the synchronization of weapon systems with data sources and sensors. What's really different about it is we're talking open architecture now. Obviously, JADO is enabled by the Joint All-Domain Command and Control capability, JADC². It is cloud-based, which is new. It opens the door for artificial intelligence, and there's some byproducts that I think are going to be very advantageous, which is possibly even opening the door for bringing in contributions from allied partners. Multi-domain operations is the Army's contribution to JADO. Our Chief of Staff, General McConville, wrote a very informative paper. It's quite lengthy, but it really gives a good description of multi-domain operations. And he has a vision by 2035. By the way, I don't think we're going to have to wait that long, because the Army is already really getting after it, and we're going to see a lot of capabilities. We already see some now. But the Army, as part of the Joint Force, will counter and defeat near-peer adversaries in all domains, as was mentioned before: land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. It's going to provide commanders with numerous options for executing simultaneous operations, presenting multiple dilemmas to our adversaries, and it's going to create physical and psychological advantages.
You can find the entire conversation and sign up for live events on defensenews.com. And now for this week's defense industry headlines.
The Biden administration wants to remove barriers in it so federal government can more quickly respond to cyber attacks. Following government cyber breaches, the Biden administration issued a cybersecurity order requiring improved protections at government agencies and prompt breach reports from federal computer network and cloud service suppliers. The executive order, signed on May 12, touches on many issues that the Defense Department is weighing to ensure the adequate protections among its vast information technology supplier network. That effort is driven in large part by lawmakers' alarm over recent high-profile government network compromises. For example, lawmakers ordered the DoD to assess programs to share cybersecurity information with the defense industrial base and to consider the possibility of a threat hunting program on vendors' networks. The security of the military's most sensitive information, such as weapons controls and service members' locations, rides on its cyber protections. Britain has confirmed it will acquire 14 Boeing-made Chinook helicopters, but the government has prolonged the delivery schedule over the next decade due to budget issues. The deal was made through the U.S. Defense Department's foreign military sales process and will see Britain pay $2 billion for the helicopters and associated equipment. Deliveries are scheduled to start in 2026 and be completed in 2030. That's about 3 years behind the original plan, as the British Defense Ministry has prioritized more pressing modernization needs ahead of the Hilo acquisition. The agreement includes development work on manufacturing of the extended range helicopter over the next decade. Over its 40 years in the service with the British military, the Chinook helicopter has been used for a diverse range of roles, from special operations to cargo carrying and civil emergencies. The forthcoming helicopter, known as the H-47ER, is destined primarily for Special Forces operations. The Ministry of Defense said in a statement that the helicopter will have a top speed of 300 kilometers per hour, and the new H-47ER aircraft will have a range of new capabilities, including an advanced digital cockpit, modernized airframe to increase stability and improve survivability, and a digital automatic flight control system to allow pilots to hover in areas of limited visibility. Officially announcing the deal on May 13th, Defense Secretary Ben Wallace said the investment will mean the UK will have one of the few air forces with those capabilities. And that's it in the defense industry news. Coming up, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives tips on how to separate your personal finances from your business ones.
On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack talks about the basics for separating your business finances from your personal ones.
Some things just work well together, like peanut butter and jelly, or in the banking world, credit cards and rewards. But sometimes there are things that just don't mix, like using a personal account for business purposes. It may seem like a small thing, but having separate records of your income and expenditures is key to running your own business. And mixing the two can affect your legal liability. To keep things clear, get an employer identification number, or EIN, from the IRS if you haven't already. You'll use this number for filing your business tax return or applying for a business loan or credit card and more. Then choose a business structure that really fits your long-term goals, an LLC or a corporation. Open a business checking account or a savings account and a business credit card with a financial institution you trust. Then keep records of incoming and outgoing payments, supplies, or equipment purchases. This makes bookkeeping and tax season a whole lot easier. And using a business credit card is a great way to build up your business credit score. Reach out to your business lender for help making the best move for you and your business. A clearer and separate picture of your operating income and expenses will keep you on the right track for business success.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To stay up to date on all the latest military and defense headlines, check out our coverage online at Army, Navy, Air Force, and MarineCorpsTimes.com and DefenseNews.com. And for the top stories in your inbox every weekday, subscribe to the Early Bird Brief. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube for more. And when we come back, the Military Times team of reporters and editors breaks down the biggest stories of the week. On this week's Reporters Roundtable, our crew of reporters and editors looks at some of the latest in military and defense headlines. Take a look.
You authorized mobilizing the DC National Guard.
Welcome to the Military Times Reporters Roundtable, where we bring you the news behind the biggest headlines each week. I'm Leo Shane, Capitol Hill reporter for Military Times, and I have with me a panel of experts to give us insight on the top stories. With me today are Megan Myers, our Pentagon Bureau Chief, Howard Altman, our managing editor, and Andrew Tillman, our executive editor. Thank you guys all for joining us. Megan, it's been about 4 months since the attack on the Capitol as Congress tried to certify the presidential election results, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions about the military's response to that event. Former Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller was on Capitol Hill testifying just a few days ago about the delay in sending Guard troops. Give us a rundown of what was discussed and what the latest status is there.
So Miller hewed very closely to the official timeline that DoD put out in the few days after January 6th. A lot of the lawmaker questions were about that timeline, were about when he realized that the Capitol had been overrun, when he got a request for backup, and when he actually approved that request. So according to that timeline, it was about an hour and a half between when the Capitol Hill police let him know that they needed National Guard help and him making the order to mobilize the entire DC National Guard. It then, of course, took them until about between 5 and 6 p.m. to actually show up on the Capitol grounds. And lawmakers were really trying to understand why that decision-making process took so long. So Miller answered some questions about his thinking on that day and then the planning leading up to it. But he also made a really big statement about how some of the criticism of the way that the Pentagon responded to or planned for what was supposed to be a rally on January 6th really belies a lack of understanding about how the military plans for things, what their role is in law enforcement and in keeping the peace domestically, and how long it takes to mobilize thousands of troops and to come up with a plan of action on the fly the way that they did that day.
All right, so let's shift from troops on Capitol Hill to troops in Afghanistan. Lately, there's been a lot of reports about the continued withdrawal of troops from there. All U.S. troops are supposed to be out by September 11th, but still a lot of questions. Megan, what can you tell us about where that stands right now?
So as of CENTCOM's update today about the drawdown, they are between 13 and 20% complete with the full drawdown, but CENTCOM has very purposely not been releasing any troop numbers. We know as of January, there were 2,500 conventional forces and about 800 more special operations forces. Some Rangers were sent in to do extra security at the beginning of the drawdown. So there could be as many as 3,000 to 4,000 troops there right now, but we really don't know.
One of the other big lingering questions that we keep hearing from lawmakers is what's going to happen to all of those Afghan allies who get left behind, all these interpreters, these support staff, and their families. Andrew, I know this has been an issue for years, but it seems like the concern level is very high that these folks are going to be in danger.
Yeah, I think it is very high, and for two reasons. One, I think you have a whole generation of military service members that have some really, deep ties and real long-term relationships with Afghans that have really helped them out in many ways over the years. And I also think that the situation in Afghanistan is a little more dire. I think the threat is much greater than when we left, for example, Iraq in 2011. I think that the risk and concern that there's going to be a really kind of, period of violence and score settling and vendettas playing out over the next, year or so after U.S. troops leave. I think that's a much higher risk than it was in Iraq.
And I want to get back to that level of violence in a second. But Howard, I know you've talked to some of these families and some troops who have close connections to some of these Afghan allies. What are you hearing from them right now?
Well, there's a great deal of concern. I would say several times a month I get frantic messages on Signal from an Afghan interpreter who cannot get into this country. There's a waiting list of about 18,000 interpreters from Afghanistan, people who've helped us. The people I've talked to, the troops that have worked closely with the interpreters and the interpreters themselves are very concerned for the family members and those left behind, because the Taliban has already threatened family members, threatened them, threatened to kill them for working with the U.S. And the concern is once the Taliban takes power in Afghanistan, retribution will become a way of life.
Well, and as that violence ramps up, there's a lot of concern about the rise of terrorist groups again. So, the rise of ISIS in there. Andrew, what can we expect if troops aren't on the ground? Can the U.S. military really fight terrorism in Afghanistan?
Well, I think that's certainly a big question that a lot of people at the Pentagon are asking. I think the Air Force is certainly preparing to continue conducting some ISR flights over Afghanistan. If they need to, they're prepared to do some airstrikes. But I think the real issue is going to be the intelligence. You have to know what you're looking at or what you're targeting in order for it to be successful. And while we certainly know a lot of people in Afghanistan after all these years, I think we don't know where those people are going to be after we leave. Are they going to be in a position to know what's going on and to help us, or amid all of the chaos that may ensue after we leave, are they going to be not available for whatever the reason?
Well, it's something we'll be keeping a close eye on. You can read all of our stories at militarytimes.com. I want to thank my panel for their insights today and thank all of you for watching. We'll see you next time.
And that's it for our show this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.